Lesson 8, Unit Rates and Verbal Descriptions. All right, let's get into those questions. Our first question, we want to know, it says an artist wants to purchase a canvas to paint. The price for a canvas is determined based on the canvas size in square inches. And the artist purchased a 210.84 square inch canvas for $24. Part A says, what does the unit rate mean in this scenario? So if I were to take the two numbers that I'm given here, this 210.84 and this 24.99, remember when we're writing unit rates, money is always going to go up top. So I'm going to have 24.99 over 210.84. So if I were to read this from top to bottom, I would have the price per, remember this line means per, and this is 210 square inches, which means that for part A, the unit rate is the price per square inch of canvas. Now for part B, it wants to know how would you calculate the unit rate? Well, we already know that money has to go on top, so I'm going to pick the option that has money in top of my ratio and make sure that the numbers are the same from the problem. Next question. On Sunday, the total pollen count for ragweed in Dr. Brown's town is 36 ppm, which stands for parts per million. Dr. Brown sees 6 patients for migraines that day. On Monday, the pollen count is 72 ppm, and Dr. Brown sees 9 patients that day for migraines. In this situation, the independent variable is blank. The relationship between pollen count and the number of patients with migraines is blank. All right, so let's focus on blank 1 first. So for blank 1, it's talking about the independent variable. So when we have our unit rates of y over x, y is our dependent variable, x is our independent. And the difference between the two is that dependent variables are dependent on whatever my x is. Okay, so if I'm talking about going to a store and buying apples, the amount of money that I spend on those apples is dependent on how many I buy. So here, Dr. Brown sees more patients the higher the pollen count, right? It looks like if my pollen count is increasing, he's going to see more patients. So the amount of patients that Dr. Brown will see is dependent on the pollen count for that day. Now for blank 2, we are asked, we want to know the relationship between the pollen count and number of migraines. So if I look here at this 36 ppm for 6 patients, if there's 36 parts per million of pollen count and he has to see 6 patients with migraines, if I were to simplify this, I would get 6 over 1. So for every 6 pollen count, he has to see 1 patient with a migraine. So for every 6 ppm of pollen in the air, 1 more patient will visit Dr. Brown with a migraine. Our next one here says Nicole rides her bike to school. The number of times her wheels rotate depends on the distance she travels. On her 1.5 mile ride to school, her wheels rotate 231 times. What is the unit rate for this situation? So it says here that the number of times her wheels rotate depends on the distance. Okay, so since it's dependent on the distance, that means distance is going to be my dependent variable, which means that is my y. So when I write my y over x, remember this is going to be distance over her wheels spinning. So she rides 1 2/5 miles over 200, and her wheels rotate 231 times. So to figure out the unit rate, I need to divide this by 231. And in order to do this easily, we can use Desmos. So if I pull this calculator over here, I'm going to do 1 space 2 over 5, and I'm going to divide this whole thing by 231. Oops. Okay. So I made a mistake here, and I want to talk about it because I think it's a mistake that you could make easily as well if you're going too fast when reading these problems. So let's backtrack to our very start. All right, so let's think about where this problem is starting. If it says that her wheels rotate, the number of times her wheels rotate is dependent on the distance. That means that if I bike a shorter distance, my wheels will spin less times. So what this is actually telling us is that the independent variable is the distance, because the number of times that her tires rotate is based on how far she travels, which means that our y over x is actually going to be flipped. So 231 will go on top and her distance will go on bottom. So I need to get to a 1, so I'm going to divide by 1 and 2/5 on top and bottom. Oops. So now we can bring back our Desmos and type this in, and we'll get a much better number. I get 165. So that means that her wheel rotates 165 times for every 1 mile that she travels. Our next question says, Eden records pet adoptions at an animal shelter. She notices that for every 4 dog adoptions, there are 3 cat adoptions. Which equations describe the number of cat adoptions C based on dog adoptions D at the animal shelter? Select all that apply. Okay, so it looks like for every 4 dog adoptions, there are 3 cat adoptions. So I'm going to have a D here and a G. So for every 4 dog adoptions, there are 3 cat adoptions. If there are 8 dog adoptions, there are going to be 6 cat adoptions. Okay, I'm multiplying by 2 on this side, so I'm going to multiply by 2 on this side. So a quick way to check this is to pick one of these pairs and just plug them into our equations to see if they work. Now I can tell you right now that B and C are not going to work because they only use one of the numbers from our 2 different numbers we have in our problem, this 4 and 3. We can't have just the 3 used without the 4 because that isn't telling us the ratio or the relationship between them. So with our graph here, well not graph, our table, let's pick 4 and 3 because 4 and 3 are the 2 smaller numbers. So this means that D is going to be represented by 4 because that's the number of dogs. And C is 3 because that's the number of cats. So for A, 3 over 4 times 4 equals 3. I'm going to set all of these up at one time and then we'll go ahead and type them into a calculator to double check. So we have 3 over 3 equals 4 over 4. And so this is 4 equals 3 over 4 times 3. Alright, so I'm going to pull back our calculator, clear all of this, and I'm going to type these in to see if we get what it equals. So I have 3 over 4 times 4. That gives me 3, which means this first one works. This next one, 3 over 3 is 1, 4 over 4 is 1. So these two also equal each other. Let's check that last one. So 3 over 4 times 3, that does not give me 4, which means that this here does not equal it, so it cannot be that option, which means we are going to be looking at these two answer choices right here. Next one says an internet clothing company allows returns on all purchases this month. There were 11,689 items sold with 566 returns. Part A wants to know which ordered pair represents the unit rate for this situation. So for unit rate, we do want a 1 in our x, because remember unit rate is y over x, and my goal is to have a 1 in the bottom, which means I'm looking for x to be 1, which we have both of here. Now, for the y, it says that 11,689 items were sold with 566 items returning. So if I want to know how many items were returned, then I want to be able to, if there's 11,689 items sold and 566 items are returned, we have to figure out how many total items that the company sold. So for a coordinate pair, we'd want to pick this first one here. For part B, where it's asking if there are 14,699 sales, how many items will probably be returned? This is where we're going to take a ratio. So 11,689 over 14,699. Whoops, nope. That goes up here. Sorry, we want to have the same units in the same spots. And I'm putting x down here because I don't know how many items will be returned. From here, what we're going to do is cross multiply. Multiply diagonally. So 11,689x. And I'm going to pull up for my calculator because that's probably going to give us a big number. So 14,699 times 566. So let's see, we do get a rather large number. 8,319,634. Now to get x by itself, we need to divide both sides by 11,689. So if we divide these two, we get this 711.7. Now the question says to round to the nearest whole number. So if this gave us 711.7, the nearest whole number is going to be 712 items. Alright, so lesson 8 is a little bit tricky just because you have to make sure you're reading the questions extra carefully. So if you do have other questions, please let me know. Other than that, have a wonderful rest of your day.